It is Thursday morning, February 25th, 2021. This is the Ethics Committee of the Georgia Senate. No, you're in the right place. You're good. If you would, please join me for an invocation. Father, we're grateful for opportunity and we're grateful for service. We ask you for your wisdom and your knowledge and your patience and your perseverance as we work through the challenging times in our state. We ask these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. We have a busy morning this morning. The chair notes the presence of a quorum. Thank you for being here. I'd also like to thank our guests who are with us this morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being involved and interested in this process. If you need a listening device, see one of our staff. We'll be happy to take care of that. We have some sign-up sheets on the podium if you'd like to speak to legislation this morning. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get to that point. We have two bills for consideration this morning. Senate Bill 62 by Senator Tippins and Senate Bill 241 by Leader Dugan. I'm going to start this morning with Senator Tippins and Senate Bill 62. Senator, do you have a substitute? Yes, I do. The senator has a substitute, should be in the folders of the committee. I need a motion from a member of the committee to consider the substitute. I have a motion from Senator Robertson, a second. Second from Senator Anvatarte. All those in favor of considering the substitute, that would be LC 280260S. LC 280260S. All those in favor of considering the substitute indicate with the uplifted hand. Thank you very much. Senator Tippins, if you would please present your bill.
Committee, I appreciate it. Let me explain the reason for the substitute over the original. In the original bill, I had a provision on the authenticity of the ballot. It was specifically designated to have a hologram. In discussions with experts in the security field, they said that there's better language to use that can offer a more current science in an array of ballot security, and that's the only changes that were made, and I'll cover that in its entirety as we go through. I would say this, just in preface to presenting the bill, this bill is about the validity, the authenticity, and the security of ballots. It does not limit anyone or restrict any legal voter from exercising their right to vote. This should have a bipartisan appeal because both parties at times in the past, in 2016, 18, and 20, have said we think the election may be flawed. This is an attempt to go to the heart of how elections are determined, and that is by the ballot and by ballot security. The sole purpose is to ensure the integrity of our voting process. I'll go through the bill. The first aspect that the bill deals with is precinct identification on each ballot. The reason I'm asking for that is not currently required. When we had the recount in Cobb County, I asked the election supervisor, I said, do you store the ballots by precinct so you can audit by precinct? They said no. The only ballots that are stored by precinct are those ballots that are actually cast on election day. Even the early voting in-person ballots are not stored that way. I believe it's critical to be able to audit precinct by precinct. So this bill you'll see in several places. You think I must have a hang up or something about the precinct being printed. The reason it's in so many places is the code deals with different ballots for different type elections, so it's very repetitive in there. But basically it says that the precinct and the designation of the precinct would be printed on each ballot at the time the ballot is issued. direct your attention to line 104 through 109. Every ballot used in primaries and election in this state, including paper ballots, ballots used in optical scanning, voting machines, and ballots produced by electronic ballot markers, shall have overt, covert, and forensic elements embedded in the ballots, of which some of these security elements can be validated at the polling place at the time of voting. Such devices or seals shall not be capable of identifying the elector who cast the ballot, but shall be designed to restore voter confidence in the ballot to prevent fraud. What this does, this was the change from the hologram. We were told that holograms are most effective when they're on laminated material or they're on plastic material on a paper ballot. A hologram does not have the validity, and you can actually put the security within the paper itself of the ballot. That's the most modern science we have, and that's a change that was made. It's the same principle behind the printing of our money. That's the same security system they use in the type of paper that's used and the type of ink that's used. The third part of the bill I'd like to address is lines 130 through 135. This has to do with tracking the number of ballots issued by precinct and the status of the ballot. We already maintain the status of absentee ballots in early voting. You can call in on My Voter, or you can access My Voter on the website. What this will do will tie this down to precincts. I think there's been a lot of concern about actually tracking the number of ballots that are issued. Throughout all of this process, the number of the ballots will be tracked, but the information on the ballot itself will remain private to protect the privacy of the voter. The next aspect this bill deals with in a major way is on line 141. The ballot shall be subject to security review at all times by authorized security auditors trained and equipped to detect ballot fraud. Upon the conclusion of the counting, the absentee ballot shall be sorted and stored by precinct in security sealed containers. Best practices of chain of custody for such containers shall be maintained and subject to authorized security auditors' inspection and review until such ballots can be legally disposed of. The term legally disposed of, all elections officers are supposed to maintain the ballots until the next general election, so they have to keep them for 2 years. This has to do with establishing protocols for the security of the storage of these ballots. I've personally had people complain to me that they went into a particular precinct. There was no one actually, the precinct was open. No one was actually in the precinct manning it. The doors were open, but there was no personnel in there that was visible. So this has to do with the security and maintaining the security and the chain of custody throughout the process. The last issue that this bill deals with, and I think it's has been a concern of many people, is on line 196. I know in the past race, we've seen a lot of ballots that were adjudicated where it was a situation where the intent of the voter was not clear, and there was a replacement ballot that was prepared, that was processed to represent what the adjudicator would determine to be the intent of the voter. I don't have any problem with that. I understand some ballots can be damaged. I understand some ballots can be unclear. The only thing what this provides for is the maintenance of the validated ballot originally that was issued to the state. If there is a replacement ballot that's prepared, the original ballot would be maintained with that for future comparison or audit if it need be. This is the crux of the bill. As you can see, all this has to do is with the security and the storage of the ballot, and the reason is to ensure the confidence of the voting public that their ballot and their votes being cast, and it's being maintained in a way that's acceptable. I'll be glad to entertain any questions that you may have on this issue.
Thank you, Senator. We appreciate that. Questions? I recognize the distinguished Dean of the Senate.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Senator. Let me ask you about the process when we're doing early voting. And you said it would have the ballot would have the precinct on that. So the election board would have printed up so many ballots for that particular precinct, and when the person say, I'm from precinct 10 or whatever the precinct is, they give them that particular ballot, or the voter would be required to write that in?
No, sir. It's my understanding, and I believe it's to be true, each ballot that's sent out on an absentee ballot, when the voter makes a request for an absentee ballot, that ballot is specifically printed for them, because even in the same precinct, not all voters in a precinct vote for the same candidates. You may have particular district lines that are in a precinct and it's split. They may not vote for the same representative, same senator, same anybody.
And I really intended to say early voting, and I said early voting.
On early voting, yeah. If it's early voting in person, if you recall, when you go, they punch in your identification, and because of that identification, they already have in the computer system what the format of your particular ballot is based on where your location of address is. So all of these basically have to be custom printed anyway. And so as it's custom printed, it's for that particular voter, and it's recorded, and you maintain the number of ballots issued.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator.
Other questions? Senator Butler, the Minority Leader.
Good morning, Senator.
Good morning.
So I want to continue with that line of question.
Yes, ma'am.
So when a person goes to an early voting site and present their identification and it's punched in the computer,
yes, ma'am,
that indicates right then where their precinct is, doesn't it?
It indicates. It's encoded. But you cannot look at the ballot and tell from an examination of the ballot, because I specifically asked in Cobb County, I said, how do you store the ballots? And they said, we do not. I said, do you store them by precinct? And they said, no, we don't have any way to store them by precinct, because they process ballots by batches. The intent of this bill is that all ballots that are cast in a precinct, in the final storage of it, they'll be sorted and stored by precinct. So at any time, if there needs to be an audit of that precinct, you have all the ballots of that precinct, and you can tell by physical examination of that ballot that that ballot was issued in that precinct.
So your thinking is that at some point, someone may have to go back and look at that ballot?
I think not that they would look at that ballot. I don't think anybody would be auditing a particular ballot, because you don't know whose particular ballot it is. But when you go back and you look at the voting of that particular precinct, the election office posts that a particular precinct has X number of votes. But they cannot show you the precinct. They cannot show you the physical ballots that you can identify visually that they are actually the precinct of that ballot. This bill provides that when you post numbers for the voting total results in a precinct, you will actually have those ballots that you can audit either by machine or you can audit by hand. But it will be visible that it's clearly printed. Each ballot has to be customized to the voter, because, as I said, you may have a large precinct. Different people in different precincts are going to be voting for different. In the same precinct, can very well be voting for different people.
I used to know practically everything about these laws, but over the years we've changed so much, I've lost track of what we do. I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
If you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am.
Would this require, these extra steps require extra staff and extra resources?
They should not require extra staff. I think the idea in this is you would have specifically printed ballots. I say specifically printed. You would have ballots that are printed that, let me back up. You're going to have X number of ballots that are validated, authenticated ballots of the state of Georgia. A certain number of those ballots will be sent to each county election office. A certain number of those ballots will be sent to each precinct for in-person voting. But as these ballots are sent out to, if they're sent out on absentee ballots that are not going to be absentee early voting in person, but actually an absentee mail-in ballot, that has to be printed anyway, so it will be printed, but the precinct identification will be on that.
Sounds like a lot of sorting to me. Mr. Chairman, I said I had one more question, but I forgot I wrote down one.
One more for the
One more
minority leader.
question.
Thank you.
Absolutely, for my friend.
And I'm not trying to be facetious. What does ballot fraud look like? We talk about fraud all the time, but nobody's ever said exactly, or at least I have not heard it, exactly what ballot fraud looks like.
Well, I think the best example of ballot fraud is the same, it would be the same issue of a counterfeit currency. You can just about feel currency until the people that are in the banking business can feel the paper. Ballot fraud would be the same thing. Would be a ballot that purports to be a ballot that is not a valid ballot. But if we track the number of ballots, if we know where the ballots are sent to, I think what this does is restores confidence in the voting system. And I don't see in any way how this precludes anyone from voting. Every legal voter has a right to cast a vote, and we want every legal voter that desires to cast a vote to cast a vote. But we don't need to have the ability for someone to generate additional ballots that are not valid ballots.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the senator from the 29th.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for bringing this legislation forward. I have a couple of questions. On line 106, you talk about covert and overt descriptives on the ballot or markings.
Yes, sir.
Or excuse me, I'll use your term, forensic elements embedded in the ballots. Now, overt, of course, means open and recognizable, and covert would mean hidden. So the statement you just made as far as counterfeit money, certain denominations of the currency we use today have those extremely overt markings on them that every citizen can see, and then hidden within the fabric of the currency are covert identifiers that if held under certain lights and if certain types of pens are used, we can identify that in fact is or is not a counterfeit piece of money. So what you're purporting to do is that we apply that same technology to ballots?
That's the latest science on security for currency, and that's why we moved away from the hologram language, because this is the latest technology in security.
Right. And to the Dean of the Senate's question, there's a early voting in Muskogee County. There's the primary voting spot is where his supporters and my supporters have the opportunity to commingle and to vote. So those that would vote in early voting for me and those that would vote in early voting for Senator Harbison, once their ballots had been cast, would their ballots go into the precinct box of where the early voting occurred, or would they go to the precinct box of where that particular voter would have voted if they had not early voted?
I'm not an expert on the protocols, but I would say that if you're having early voting, because you have certain precincts that are designated that you can vote from even though you may reside in any precinct in the county, you could go to any of the early voting locations. But when you go and present your identification, the chip that they put in the machine prints your individualized ballot. I think by necessity that it's going to have to be maintained. It's going to have to be sent to the county elections office. But in the ultimate storage of that afterwards, they report on early voting, early voting ballots are cast and they are reported by precinct. And at the time they're reported by precinct, then they would be sorted by precinct and preserved by precinct. I don't think the sorting out is going to happen at the precinct. I think that needs to happen at the county election office.
Thank you. One final question, Mr. Chair. If I understand you correctly, if they go in early vote, all the early voting ballots will be sequestered in secure containers for where the early voting occurred. They'll not be commingled with the election day ballots that were cast at the individual's precinct that they're assigned to if they would have waited till election day to vote at their precinct. Therefore, the numbers of early votes that are reported will coincide with the number of ballots within that container at the early voting location, and then the day of voting ballots will coincide with the numbers that they say voted at that precinct on election day. Is that correct?
That's correct. But after that process, those ballots it's very easy to sort these by precincts. You can run them through a sorting machine. After that initial counting and sorting electronically, then those ballots will be separated and stored by precinct. So all the ballots that are cast in a particular precinct and the mandated amount of time that the ballots have to be maintained in a secure state until they can be disposed of, all ballots in a particular precinct will be stored together.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The chair recognizes the President Pro Tem.
Mr. Chairman, at the appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion.
Thank
You
you.
probably have other questions.
Thank you, Senator. I have a
realize that.
question
Beg
from
your pardon.
Senator Harrell. Chair recognizes the senator from the 40th.
Yes, thank you. Has there been a cost calculated for the implementation of this bill, and will that cost be borne by the state or pushed down to the counties?
We have a pretty good idea of what it costs. We've been told that the secure ballots probably cost the printing of the preparation of the ballot that's sent to the county will probably run between 20 and 25 cents a ballot. I think in terms of the confidence of the Georgia voters, if we got 6 million voters to prepare secure ballots, $1.5 million is an awfully cheap price that you have to pay to be able to assure people that their ballots is preserved and counted correctly as they intended it to be.
And will there be an appropriation in the state budget for that for the counties, or the county's going to bear that cost?
I really think this is the printing of those ballots and any security measures that go along with it. I really think it ought to be a state appropriation.
And are you pursuing a state appropriation?
I am.
Thank you, Senator. If I have no further questions, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to pass.
All right, move do pass by substitute. Is that correct, Senator?
That's correct. Beg your
Correct.
pardon.
Second, Senator Burke. All those in favor of the motion to do pass by substitute indicate with the uplifted hand. All those opposed, same sign. Thank you. The
Thank you very much.
motion passes. The do pass by substitute passes 8 to 4. Thank you very much.
Thank you
All right,
very much.
thank you, Senator. We're going to move now to Senate Bill 241. Majority Leader Dugan, if you would please present this bill from the dais.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. I will obviously space myself so I can take my mask off so I'm easier heard. I also want to thank the members of the committee for letting me present Senate Bill 241. Mr. Chair, what I'm going to ask you to start this is that we make today a hearing only. I have made numerous changes to the document that you have in front of you, and it's my understanding that there are several proposed amendments that the committee members will request that I want to make sure that we have them included as well. I'm also going to ask for a collaborative effort from our committee. We often talk about how bills can be perfected during these discussions, and this one's extremely important. And what we're doing here hasn't been done really a significant reform since 2005. So it's not something that we ought to take lightly, and I look forward to working with the other members of the committee to make sure we get this right. I'm going to go through the entire bill first, as many sections are interconnected, and there have been many changes. So to avoid confusion later on, if you could, instead of amendments being offered during the process, let me just talk it through.
Without objection. Thank you, Senator. Please.
Section 1. During the election process, the Secretary of State has his hands full with the actual conduct of any given election. We are fortunate in Georgia where it seems like every turnout exceeds the previous one, and this one small change could help him focus his attentions on the success of the election process. A second thought that I had in this, with making the modification in this section is there's benefit, even if it's just with public perception, that the person running the election be different than the person who's receiving the complaints and checking into possible issues with the election. That's why I'm saying that the hotline go to the Attorney General's office. I know the Secretary of State has one. I'm not saying he can't. I'm just saying that the Attorney General maintains the hotline for alleged irregularities. Section 2, this would be creating a new section labeled 21-2-35, but I'll also be referring back to 21-2-31. I think the State Election Board was created in 1959, and the composition and responsibilities of that board have changed over the years. In 21-2-31, that the SEB, their role are delineated in that section. Those duties are broad, but also nebulous enough that they invite multiple interpretations. Part of our responsibility here in the General Assembly is to make sure there are continual checks and balances that our form of government is designed to have, along with allowing the SEB to more ably comply with Section 6 of their duties. Section 3, I understand that there may be a chance requested, or a change requested here, but I'm going to talk what's in this bill now. During my research for this bill, I learned that a few short years ago, one of our metro counties, one of our bluer counties, delegation had concerns about the performance of their election superintendent. When I say superintendent, that also includes the boards by definition. But that delegation had no recourse to address those concerns. The SEB would, if necessary under this revision, make recommendations for action that the county's local delegation, and that delegation could then choose what actions, if any, they wanted to take. That could be a suspension, it could be a replacement, but the State Election Board and that local delegation would get together to determine what changes needed to be made within their own area. Section 4, I'm going to use the term ERIC throughout this area. It's the Electronic Registration Information Center. There's a multi-state voter registration system called ERIC that Georgia does participate with. I overcomplicated this section by spelling out what ERIC is rather than simply using the name. All this section is doing is saying Georgia will use ERIC rather than Georgia may use ERIC. On line 77, I'm asking that, in quotations, a multi-state registration system be changed back to what it originally was and just say ERIC. Section 5, in 1998, Georgia authorized mobile voting facilities. So some of the concerns that we may have heard about the legality of those mobile facilities are unfounded. However, the 98 intent of those facilities was not how they were most recently used. The mobile facilities were intended to serve as a backup for existing polling locations should there be an issue with those existing facilities or those facilities were inadequate in size to meet the population demands. The wording in the 98 law is vague, and this language was inserted to clarify and prevent further confusion. Section 6. Also under the impression that there may be an amendment offered here that would significantly change this area, but again, I'm going to address what's in the bill in front of you. Absentee electors refer to everyone who votes on a day or manner other than in person on election day. There are, in addition, 3 methods of absentee electors. There's mail-in, early in-person, and military overseas ballots. The different types can be a little bit confusing, so for the sake of this section, we're talking about mail-in absentees. As we all know, in 2005, the General Assembly created a no-excuse absentee ballot authorization. And yes, it was a Republican-controlled General Assembly that made that change. The number of electors that chose that method of voting stayed fairly small and consistent until recently, when the numbers rose dramatically. This, in effect, meant elections officials were conducting 3 elections simultaneously. That put enormous stress on poll workers, significantly drove up costs for the counties, and unfortunately, the highest rate by far of rejected ballots are those that are mail-in ballots. Even with a curing process, our citizens are far more likely to have their votes rejected with the absentee mail-in ballot than they are any other way. What we have listed here is a broad area that would serve for valid excuses. So the opportunities are still there, but with the workload, the cost, and maybe most importantly, the greater certainty for our voters to know that their vote counted. That's why we had modified back to an excused absentee mail-in ballot. Simply 7 is simply what you would do to request a non-military overseas absentee mail-in ballot. Section 8 covers the process of physically requesting that absentee ballot. Section 9 is supposed to focus on the curing process for mail-in absentee ballots, and it does, but the language in the paragraph 6, starting on line 228, is not intended for this section, and it's one of those that we have corrected and in the substitute. So the line starting on 228 what needs to be adjusted. Section 10, I commend organizations from all sides of the ideological spectrum for driving to get our eligible voters out and engage. That is why we chose this solution that we presented here rather than follow other states like Tennessee, who opted to ban non-official mailings for absentee write-in ballots. Our nation's voting history during presidential election years has traditionally been above 50%, and I believe there's only been 3 times in our history that it's been below 50%. But in 2020, that percentage jumped to 62%, and that's the highest it's been in our nation's history, or at least till 1960. And don't get me wrong, I think that's a great thing. I commend the voter drive efforts for making that possible. Unfortunately, some of the mailings about how to get those absentee ballots led to many of our citizens being confused, thinking that the state was sending multiple ballot requests to their homes. What we're doing here is simply requiring some simple notification on the mailings, much like what we have to do with our own campaign mailings to alleviate that confusion. Section 11 is pure cleanup. What it says is site. Site is not defined, so we put building in there. Section 12. On line, I would ask that on line 286 we put a period after the word envelope, and then strike everything until after the period following amended on line 292. This is language that was from a rough draft that was not intended for this bill. I'll pause here and I understand I'm doing like an auctioneer, but I know how much time we got. That would be on section 12, line 286. The stuff that I'm mentioning here, my substitute will have in there.
Thank you for clarification.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead with section 13. I'm going to ask for another small correction here. On line 369, after the word elector, I would ask that we strike in parentheses, or in quotations rather, with the enclosed photocopy of, close quotation marks, and replace with the word by. And on line 407, the section that starts with, in quotation marks, "if the election," strike there to the end of that section. And the appropriate language from Senate Bill 40 that we passed earlier this week will be inserted.
Point of clarification, Senate Bill 40, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got to go to my backup notes here. Next will be on section 14. We need to add this in coordination. The authority and language for a signature audit given to the Secretary of State of Georgia is vague. This creates clarity on that. And then starting on line 421, the sentence "for this purpose," the authorized agents aspect of that is, as we know, these ballots are sealed in a judge's control after the election process, and if there is an audit, all this does is lets the judge clearly know that the authorized members from the Secretary of State's office have access to those ballots. Section 15. I'm going to ask that we strike paragraph C in its entirety, but do want to add that provisional voters voting out of the precinct are the ones at the greatest risk for disenfranchisement in our current system. They are able to vote for the top of the ticket, but are often not allowed to vote for down ballot races. As much as possible, we should encourage our voters to vote in their precincts if they choose to vote on election day, so that they can exercise their full rights. Section 16. I am asking that Section 16 be struck in its entirety, but would caution that this area may be revisited if the actions covered in Section 21-2-412 are not more effectively followed. Section 17, 18, and 19 are language in the bill to all it's doing is creating consistency within those sections because we've made some modifications. Those are three different areas that have very similar language within the section, so we have modified those three sections to make sure that the language is the same. Section 20. This is, you start getting into the defines when the vote counting starts, and creates comparable language to other modifications of bills that we've previously passed this session. Previously it says they will start. It doesn't say when they will start. Section 21 is another one where there'll be some language that is cleaned up in the substitute, because what I did not take into account in Section 21 as written is earlier we gave a provision of how a Superior Court judge could say a precinct could stay open later because of issues they had in. This has a hard end time on it, as opposed to an adjusted end time that pertains to any measure like that would have caused a precinct to stay open later. So that would just be wordsmithing on that to make allowances for those precincts that had to stay open later than what their original previous intent was. Section 22. We all know that ballot harvesting is already currently illegal in the state of Georgia. A lot of people don't know what ballot harvesting is. So they may be unwittingly breaking the law. Section 22 is intended to more clearly define in a simple manner what is ballot harvesting. So then the question will get to, well, how about my family members? Can we not sit around the table and talk about these as we, actually it's covered in the code section already with a broad list of family members that are allowed to witness you filling out a ballot. So no, this doesn't supersede that. Section 23, this deals primarily with the situation that we're in right now under an emergency decree. It's understand that a lot of the stuff that is covered in here will go away 120 days after the emergency decree is concluded. But should we enter another emergency decree, we need to have systems in place rather than wait until we have another health emergency decree and go, you know, we should have done that last time. Section 24, this act is severable. That's be line on 607, and then section 25 is the standard closing for a bill. Mr. Chair, I am now at y'all's mercy.
I'd like to thank the Majority Leader for walking us through a complex bill, multifaceted. I'd like to remind the senators that this is a hearing only, that we will have discussion among the committee this morning and questions, and we will reconvene at 8 a.m. on Monday morning to continue this discussion and receive witness input at that time. But at this time, I will entertain questions and discussion from members. Any questions?
No questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think not, sir. I recognize the distinguished minority leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Chairman,
Thank you. You're
I'm sorry.
kind.
It's too early to know where I am almost. Senator, my first question is, why does any Georgian need permission from the government to vote absentee? And also, why does a Georgian need to get a witness? And what would the witness, what does that prove? Does the witness have to provide ID, a photocopy or something?
Thank you, Madam Leader. First of all, I do understand that I went through that 26 sections in 17 minutes, so that went pretty quick. The witness provision was struck. We drew a line through that.
I missed that.
Yeah, like I said, that's understandable at the rate I was going there. Why does any Georgian need permission to vote absentee? They have the right to vote. The method is obviously part of our responsibility to lay that out. As I was explaining during my discussion of the bill, the complexity in running 3 elections simultaneously. And when I say that, there is an aspect to running an absentee mail-in election process that is separate and distinct from absentee early in-person voting process, which is again separate and distinct from the prep for the day of election process. And then you got this little outlier out there that actually falls under federal law that is going on at the same time with the military overseas ballots. So with the complexity of all 3 of those happening at the same time, it's creating an undue burden on our elections officials. One, It is a significantly increased cost. It's, we've heard several times from people in here that go, what is the cost? Is that going to go to the counties? And it's an extremely significant cost on the counties to process those ballots. Excuse me. And the third thing that, as I was saying in my comments, that may be of the greatest concern is, sorry, you got me choked up over here. Is the percentage, the highest percentage of votes that are rejected, even with the strong curing process that we have here in Georgia, it's the absentee mail-in ballots that are the greatest. Now, Georgia is one of the 9 most permissible voting states in the nation. Of that 9, and it's strange because they are all around the country. Of that 9, 6 are Republican controlled, 3 are Democrat controlled. So, I mean, we are very, very permissive in how we do it. All we're trying to do here is make sure that we can afford it, that the offices can manage it, and the voters are certain their vote actually counted.
So that's why we need permission?
Mm-hmm.
I do have one more question. I'm going to make it just one more question. I have a lot of questions, but I'm just going to ask you one more question.
Madam Lady, you got the preacher yesterday. One more means absolutely.
It generates another one.
Yes, I know how it goes.
When I was going through the bill and looking at election day restrictions, it's so many things that are banned, they are prohibited. Early voting in person at non-governmental owned buildings, does that mean that no churches, no other buildings?
What line are you on?
I don't know where it is. I just have a sheet that I
Then,
went through.
if you could, instead of us digging back through it, if you don't mind, I will find that, get you the answer, and give it to everybody else on the committee.
And I'm asking that question because my church has 3 locations, and we provide early voting for the communities, not for just members. And
That's
it's
fairly common.
been an excellent opportunity for people to go and vote. It's convenient. They are located in areas that are easy accessible. And so that would be a travesty if we couldn't have those locations. We could only go to governmental buildings.
Let's get and find exactly what we're talking about in the bill, and then we'll address
Okay.
that question.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank the minority leader for her questions and the majority leader for his responses. The chair will recognize the President Pro Tem for a question.
Mr. Chairman, since the author of the bill is offering a substitute becoming,
That's correct, sir.
I would work with the author to include my amendment at that time, if that pleases the chairman.
That's acceptable to the chairman,
Thank you.
acceptable to the author. Thank the President Pro Tem. Chair recognizes the senator from the 17th.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to say the same thing, but I think it would be better if the committee, if it's your will, the majority leader is okay, the committee took a vote on an amendment that I'd like to offer and see if it passes first. And if it's the will of the committee for my amendment to be in the sub, I could then work with the majority leader in putting it in there. So if it's appropriate time, I'd like to offer an amendment.
Mr. Chair, with the amendment that I think he's about to offer, If we're going to do that, we would need to do it now because it will impact multiple sections within the bill.
Very good, with the concurrence of the author and the request.
Should it pass?
Yes, right, from the, from the distinguished Judiciary Chair, I recognize Senator Strickland.
The intent, the amendment that I would offer will be to eliminate the portions of the bill that eliminate the no excuse absentee ballot voting in our state. With the passage, I believe it was Senate Bill 40 earlier this week, I think the days are blurring together. I think it was this week. We have now, with that bill and with other parts, I believe in this bill as well, voting absentee will be as secure as any other form of voting in our state. So it's just as secure to vote by absentee as in person with those changes. I also am concerned that if we require these excuses to be offered in order to vote by absentee, we don't have a way of enforcing that. And you actually be setting up citizens, those that are willing to lie, or those that are willing to tell the truth, and make it very difficult for folks to figure out whether or not they can or cannot vote by absentee in our state. And finally, something that at least to resonate with all of us in this committee, in looking at conversations about election reform in the Capitol, it at least seems to me that no other place in the Capitol do we find support for a provision like this. And so if we're going to get this right, I think it's better to go ahead and get this right now versus putting something in the bill that we know, or at least we are assuming will not pass in the House or get a signature by the governor. So with that, I'd like the opportunity, if this amendment passes, to get the grace of the committee to work with the majority leader to make sure we get it right. But it's my understanding we would actually strike Section 6 in its entirety. With two more things, if you don't mind.
All right.
We would also, on lines 142 and 144, would strike the changes in the bill at that point. Let me say one thing. When I said strike Section 6 in its entirety, we would take away the changes that are offered in Section 6, so it would read as it is under current law. And finally, lines 314 through 316 would have to be addressed, where we would take away those changes in the bill too, where we go back and reference subsection A of Code Section 21-2-380. Now, I'll be happy to take any questions anybody wants on the amendment.
If that is offered as an amendment, I will need clarification and a written document on that, and I need a second.
I need clarification.
Again, I've got an amendment. I need a second. I have a second. Now we can have discussion. Senator Harbison?
So we're in the posture of not a hearing only today.
Hearing only today.
Yet we're voting on an amendment
That's a very valid point. The issue is the amendment is germane to the potential future substitute. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to point of order. What is the chair's ruling of that particular action?
Because the amendment makes germane changes to the bill, we need to understand the will of the committee to allow the senator to work with the majority leader if the committee's will is to.
I'm not opposed. I'm just trying to
I understand.
get order.
And I agree with you. We will consider Chairman Strickland's proposal. I have a motion and a second. Further discussion?
Chairman, yes.
Who made the second?
Senator Miller.
To my question, Mr. Chair, is to the senator offering the amendment. You referenced Senate Bill 40.
Yes.
That was presented.
Is that the correct bill number? Senator Walker's bill, if that's the correct number. Is that not the correct number?
Senator, that is not Senator Walker's bill.
67.
Senator 67
Okay.
is Senator
There
Walker.
was a confusion because Senator 40, I believe, was Senator
Senator
Jordan.
Jordan's bill.
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Senator Walker's bill. I apologize.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions on the amendment? Again, if you would please, let's go back and clarify the amendment. If you would go back through that one more time, please, Senator.
Yeah, and again, the intent is to leave Georgia law as it is with who can vote by absentee in our state. And we would be eliminating the changes in what's being offered, Senate Bill 241, eliminating the changes that are in Section 6. We'd be striking the changes in lines 142 through 144, and also the changes in lines 314 and 316. And I also would like to be able to work with Majority Leader and Legislative Council to make sure I didn't miss any other cross-references in the bill.
Other questions or comments? Chair will recognize the distinguished minority leader. Senator Butler?
I'm still confused about, is it this language that's in the book? Or is it Senate Bill 40?
It's neither. I know I
Okay.
caused confusion when I said Senate Bill 40. What I was referencing, that was my argument for the amendment, is that Senate Bill 67 made it, when it passed, at least in my opinion, and other parts of this bill as well, in requiring an ID number when someone votes by absentee ballot, that makes absentee ballot voting as secure as voting in person. That was just part of my argument I was making.
Is that the language?
That's not the language. That's Senate Bill 67 that passed on Tuesday, I believe it was.
So if you're going to amend the bill, you got to give us the language. You just can't
That's-
say Senate
not-
Bill
no,
67.
I am giving
Oh,
you
Senate Bill,
language.
sorry.
I referenced 3 places in the bill where we're taking out the requirement of having an excuse for voting by absentee. My argument for that, part of that,
Okay.
was the fact that we already passed in our bill that makes it secure.
I got you.
Other questions? Other comments? We'll take a brief pause for clarification on the amendment. If the committee would come to order. To several members' concerns, we need a very clear understanding of the proposed amendment. This is a hearing only. Even if we chose to vote on the amendment, it would not be binding because the underlying bill is not being addressed. So I would again ask the senator to work closely with the author of the bill, and certainly if you'd like a straw poll of consensus, that's one thing, but the vote itself would not be binding to the committee. What's the will of the will of the committee? And certainly I recognize the distinguished senator from the
If
17th.
the chair would allow, and there's not objection from the committee, given the late hour and how important this bill is, I would still like to have a vote on the amendment, if just the opportunity to at least have a vote on that.
Objections? Any objections?
Objection.
So I have an objection to a vote. Senator from the 29th.
Being the slowest kid in the class, my objection would be that we would be voting on an amendment, an open-ended amendment with no clear language as to what the amendment is. While the legal mind of my brother from the 17th, I think is unchallenged. The part that we'll meet with Ledge Council afterwards and discuss and things of those nature, I think that's not clear enough for me to be able to make a solid decision on what that may entail. And if that is part of the amendment that we're voting on, then I think it has to be clear as to what the discussion is, and that the amendment would have to be worded in that way. For clarity is my concern.
Thank you.
Not a parliamentary challenge to the amendment at all.
Chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Taking off my role as the bill sponsor and putting back on my other role here, since I've got different sides of the spectrum within the caucus here, he wouldn't have language by striking language because it would just be reverting back to the existing code. So there wouldn't be, you wouldn't have to revert back to the existing code. But because it's a hearing only, you can say that's going to be your intent. And you can do your straw poll if you want, but there can't be a binding vote in a hearing only.
Thank you. Senator Byrd?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is just a suggestion, and again, it's probably less valid than this non-binding vote that we've been talking about. But I think considering the complexity here, my suggestion, again, just a suggestion, would be for the majority leader to come up with a substitute that has a Strickland language in it and one that doesn't, and when we get down to voting, we'll vote on one or the other, and let's just not have this complicated non-binding suggestion. So
I appreciate the senator's recommendation. The chair recognizes the president pro tem.
I would defer to the wisdom of the gentleman from Southwest Georgia on the action of a non-binding vote. I'm not sure there is such a thing
Right.
as a non-binding vote.
Well, it's a straw poll, which we don't take.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
There we
so-
are. Thank you.
So, but I would, thank you. I would ask the gentleman from the 17th, does that meet with your agreement that you work with the majority leader to provide a version of the bill as it was proposed by the author and a version of the bill with your recommendations in it, so that the committee can take action on the version of the bill that they find most agreeable?
I request we hear from the Majority Leader and his preference on that.
Majority Leader?
I put myself in a bad spot when at the beginning of my remarks I said I want to work collaboratively with everybody on the committee. I just didn't know it was going to be individually with each. No, I think that is the way ahead, and that is, again, that's what this process is for, is to work these details out, because they will impact the lives of 11 million Georgians. So I want to kind of limit it to 2 versions, though. I don't want everybody to have their own. So we will be gladly do that.
Fine, thank you. Is that agreeable, Senator Strickland?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. And if you would withdraw your amendment?
Yes, sir. It's withdrawn.
Thank you very much. Other comments or discussions? Senator Harrell.
Yes, I have a question. My mom is a recent widow, and so she lives alone. Have you done any research into, I'm talking about the witness requirement. Have you done any research into how many Georgians do live alone and therefore would find it difficult to have that witness signature?
Thank you, Senator. First of all, I'm sorry for your mom's loss.
Well, and the
that's
pandemic has made it more complicated
Yeah.
because she doesn't have contact with other people.
Right, I'm sure. We struck that witness provision from the bill. It was one of the things I said we were going to be removing earlier.
In the substitute, is that correct,
Yes,
sir?
and that when I was going through, and again, I
Sorry,
understood
it's
how.
hard to catch all that. It went really fast.
Yeah, I know.
At 7 a.m.
I know. I was
Okay,
trying,
thank
but I
you.
didn't want to omit it. I'd rather come back and just clarify like this.
Good, because I do think that would cause a great burden for people who live alone, especially in rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
As I mentioned before, that was not even supposed to be in this draft at any
Okay.
time. It was.
Okay, sorry for the confusion.
No, it's good.
The chair recognizes that it is now 8:40, and we've had a very robust discussion this morning. We've taken no action on this bill. We have 5 witnesses that would like to speak to the bill. We will carry forward with those individuals and accept additional witness testimony on Monday in this room beginning at 8 a.m. And at that time, we will reconvene and continue to take up Senate Bill 241. Without objection, committee's adjourned. Oh, sorry. Certainly. Just a second for the distinguished leader.
will we continue to work on this bill? Like I said, I have a ton of questions on it,
Absolutely.
and we're not asking those questions today. We're getting ready to adjourn. Is that correct?
Well, we're happy to take your questions and comments. I'd ask that you work with the leader on specifics. There will be a substitute, is that correct, Mr. Leader? And perhaps an alternative with a different perspective. And we'll limit it to two versions of this because of the complicated matter. We will certainly accept additional input and discussion from the committee as well as additional witness testimony on Monday. And I look forward to continuing this opportunity to perfect the Majority Leader's bill. Senator Harrell.
Is there any way we can, before Monday, get some clarification as to, what's in the bill and what's out of the bill? I'm getting really confused.
I will work with the authors and also the proposal of a couple of substitutes to make sure that that is available to you.
Before Monday.
Hopefully tomorrow.
So we can look at it.
So you'll have it over the weekend and can review it carefully and fully, and then we will come back to committee and continue our discussion.
Mr. Chair, if I may, I can tell you what I'm recommending we strip from the bill by this afternoon.
Okay.
Now, obviously, it'll be in a substitute, so we can't move on that until that's before us. But I can tell you what I went through here and said these things will be removed. So because you're going to have constituents that see this version online.
That's right.
And say, what are you doing for this? You can say, that's not going to be in the substitute version.
Right. And I'm more of a visual person than an auditory
Yes.
person, so it would help to have it in writing.
Our office will get that out to everybody on the committee.
Thank you.
Actually, we probably need, if I could work with my counterpart in the minority party, and we'll do it on our side, we'll just get the information out to everybody in the Senate.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments? Any other discussion? Hearing none, meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.